Sunday morning news, views, and interviews. Your host Aaron Mayer, and our guest today is as I say, the incredible. We call him the Bishop, but Dr. Wallace Ford, Esquire of New York City, a man who is pretty much on the scene in history, and as I say, of a lot that has happened in New York State, especially within the Black community. I say New York State statewide because he has a career that not only stretches city government in New York City, but also his connections and with countless governors. But anyway, we got Wallace here, but we're going to have Wallace tell his story. So, Brother Wallace, welcome to News, Views, and Interviews.
And thank you very much.
You know, you and I had a conversation that started about maybe 10 to 15 years ago on a project that we were talking about was racism and equity and inclusion in the Adirondack Mountains. Both you and I were part of the keynote speakers. In fact, we had to do tag team speaking in the Adirondacks, and we've been pretty much collaborating ever since. So tell us a little bit about you and your journey, your early years, your education background, and we're going to get into a few things because I'm going to ask you about Haywood Burns. I'm going to ask you about Waldemar Stewart, Waldemar, professor who's also a state senator, and one of the pioneers in I think EOP Education Opportunity Program, along with oh goodness, I'm drawing a blank. But in short, one of the early EOP pioneers
in the city. Such men you would think it. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, tell us a little bit, brother. A tree grows in Harlem, Brooklyn, Queens. Where'd you grow up, my brother?
Well, it's first of all, thanks for inviting me. Heard about this particular initiative of yours, and so it's good to be a part of it. And so, thank you for that. I grew up in I guess in several different venues, beginning with being born in Harlem, Friday the 13th. This is January, and I looked it up in the New York Times. It was 50 degrees that day, which I don't know what that means one way or the other. But in any event, so lived in Harlem, Central Harlem, not far from the old polo grounds at the time.
Okay.
And of course, I was just a little kid, didn't know anything about that. But I left. My mother and father left, so they thought it was a good idea for me to come along. Left Harlem when I was 4 years old.
Okay.
4.5 years old. My father was working for the U.S. government in a civilian capacity as an auditor. He was an accountant by trade. And when I tell this story, I say this is just one of the examples of unintended consequences of racism. My father, when he had served in the military in World War II, and went to college with the GI Bill and all of that, and then with that accounting degree, we could not get a job at any private accounting firm in New York City. They just weren't hiring Black people, period. So he went with what he knew, which was the military, and they assigned him in a civilian capacity to work in Japan because in 1953, 54, we're talking about, there's a huge U.S. presence, occupation of Japan, 400,000 troops, and all of the ancillary support systems in place to have that many people there. And so my father went over as a civilian auditor to keep an eye on, what auditors do. And of course, my mother and I came over. I mentioned unintended consequences because it did not come from anything resembling a fancy background. My father was a college graduate, which was rare for Black males in 1950, certainly, but certainly not fancy at all. And again, we lived in Central Harlem, and if my father had been able to get a position in New York City, I would have gone to New York City public schools for sure. But as I said, because of racism, we wound up just overt racism. We wound up in Japan. We weren't living on the military bases because we were in a civilian capacity, and so I went to a Japanese kindergarten. I went to a Japanese kindergarten to learn fluent Japanese. Then went to an English Catholic school at the age of 5. And was in the first grade at the age of 5, which again could not have happened in New York City. And 2 weeks after being in the first grade, my teachers said, this is ridiculous. Put them in the second grade. And so I was 5 years old in the second grade. That would not, almost certainly could not have happened in New York City, just because of the way the education system is structured. You could be little Einstein, and that wasn't going to happen. So that gave me really a leg up in my entire academic life, because I got to do stuff sooner and earlier in my career. As a result, I was 15 years old when I was admitted to college, and
Really?
16 actually entering college, and 20 going into graduating college and going into law school, and through all of that stuff by the age of 23. But because I was tall for my age, no one ever knew I was the youngest kid in the class. I guess probably until I opened my mouth, and that would kind of do it. But it gave me a very, kind of a leg up opportunity. And I said that's kind of the unintended consequences of racism. If we had stayed in New York, that wouldn't have had that particular bit of opportunity. And we went from there to Puerto Rico, same thing, and ultimately went to school in the United States for the first time in the fifth grade. And basically, from fifth grade through high school, we lived in Teaneck, New Jersey, a suburb of New York, about 15 or more than 15 miles away from the city, and which at the time had one of the best public school systems in the United States. And
Hmm.
so, again, all the places we could have lived, we wound up there, and was able to go to very good public schools, and get the kind of background and training that is useful, because I was in school uh, where the classes that I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but the sections I was put in were basically everybody in those sections went to college and was going to college from like the seventh and eighth grade. So I was part of that process
Hmm.
as well, and so wound up going to college, and I was at Dartmouth College, and I was at Dartmouth College and was part of the initial wave of black students going to schools like Dartmouth in a have been one or two, but in numbers where there is a certain level of solidarity and internal support, and
Hmm.
not necessarily a necessity to be absorbed, if you will, and to adjust to the larger white society, but to be able to kind of manage in your own ways. And so I was at Dartmouth there, and just because these are the times. By the time I got to Dartmouth, Malcolm X had already been assassinated. Martin Luther King
Okay.
was assassinated about a year and a half later, and Vietnam was going on. George Wallace came to speak at the college, and he turned the place out. They're still talking about that. So he was planning to run for president. And New Hampshire was one of the first primary states, and he had no idea that these people that he thought he could, he had no idea that there were black people there at all, much less people there to raise hell. And so we had, aside from those interesting times, what we also did, and so we're focused enough to say we want to see institutional change. We're here and we're not here just to get a degree. We want to talk about institutional change. What did that look like in 1966, 67? Looked like more black students, obviously. But it also meant more black faculty and full-time faculty. It also meant black administrators, okay, which is something that a lot of schools did not focus on. And I don't know how my 18-year-old mind seemed like a good idea, but it turned out to be a great idea. Because the administrator, students come and go, faculty members come and go, but guess who stays? Right, it's the administrators, and so you started to see that systemic change take place there. And Dartmouth is far, far from perfect, but it is also far different from what it was when we came to that school. And so it's about incremental change taking place, and that's what we did there. Wound up going to Harvard Law School, and same thing. Still getting involved and trying to more black faculty, more black administrators, more black students, and so we made a mark there as a result. And in the process, and I've neglected to mention, Aaron, when I was in college, I did spend some time as a professional actor with a group in Harlem.
No
Two,
way.
there, yeah, there's a Negro ensemble, and then there was the Negro Ensemble, and then there was our New Heritage Repertory Company. I was in New Heritage Negro Ensemble. Everybody knows, Denzel and folks came from there. Well, we weren't too far behind, and I was, I would go to school Monday to Thursday, then fly down to New York and perform Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and enjoyed it. Thought I was pretty good at it. But when I was coming out of college, the idea of a movie career or cinematic career, only movies were like I Shot My Mama, I Shot My Mama Part Two, and why'd you shoot my mama? And so yeah, and it said, I think I better go to law school. And so I went to law school and it said headed up the Black Student Organization, which I did at Dartmouth as well. And it also had a 13-piece band, and we performed all over New England and speech writing for people like then the mayor, first the black mayor of Gary, Indiana, Richard Hatcher, and
Mhm.
also Charlie Rangel and people like that. And so started getting my just into a different kind of life. Came to New York, took the bar exam, and worked for basic law firm, and while it was okay, it was not in keeping with what the hell I've been doing for the prior 8 or 9 years. Wound up being a law secretary to one of the only black judges in the state Supreme Court system, which gave me another view of law. I also became president of the Harlem Lawyers Association, and again, it's like okay, we're not here just to take up space, and so got into a big fight with the appellate judges that are talking about we need more black judges. I think you're starting to hear a theme, right? It's where the black people, and you almost have to say it like that because otherwise people say, well, we're looking at diversity and we're looking to make sure that we have a homogeneous. And no, where are the black people? And then finally people listen. And so you see a lot more black judges now. You see black judges in the Court of Appeals and also in the appellate divisions, and ones here in New York, first and second, and so on. And so these are things that I felt was important. And in the process of doing that, I wound up writing speeches for Earl Graves and trying to get, I think I mentioned Percy Sutton and David Dinkins and so on, names that I'm sure many of your viewers know. And if you don't, then you want to look it up, Google
Well,
it. And, so,
I want you to hold that thought. We're going to be
sure.
back in a couple
Oh,
seconds after this commercial.
okay.
Sunday morning news, views, and interviews. Your host, Aaron Mayer, and our guest, Dr. Wallace Ford, a dear friend, pioneer who, Wallace, I mean, just listening in the first half on your early career, and again, and it's only those rare cases I often find that um, if the average African American scholar had to go what I call the hard road route, in which majority of our people have had to travel, their 40s, 50s, and 60s. We talk about that survivability. If you beat those odds, you've really done something. But then there are those like yourself, myself, and others whose circumstance of their dad, their mom, their job, and just a fluke of history, you ended up with an education. And I may add, that even most whites from the majority culture don't have. I mean, to be educated in Japan, to travel, halfway across the world, and even just having that exposure, you underscore the point that it's not nature, it's nurture. How you're raised, what you're exposed to, that expands and has the ability to, as I say, to build that intellectual capital and that growth of that individual and that soul. And you were living and walking that, but also the fact that the early education enrichment, where they're looking at your achievements, not your race, that even in Japan, they're moving you ahead based upon your attainment, to the point that, again, even today, it's very rare that people are moved ahead in general, but to have the circumstances and the opportunity to do that, and again, to when you're talking about finishing and entering law school, I think I was wrapping up my senior year in college when I was 23. But it's really important work, and again, these are things that have profound impacts, but you're at a very important critical time in the 60s in New York City and what's happening in the country. You had mentioned that the death of Malcolm X. Now, were you in college or were you, at home? What did that hit like when?
I was still in high school. I was still in
Okay,
high school. Yeah,
okay,
I was in college, however, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and of course that gave us an unfortunate opportunity to, just I was with the Black Student Organization, and we went on the radio and wrote this piece for the school paper, and drove everybody crazy. But basically, I think one of the lines was, black blood will no longer walk the streets alone, which didn't go over well in Hanover, New Hampshire. But we felt it. I mean, we're tired of being martyrs, and tired of being just on the wrong side of these kinds of things, and we're just not going to take it. And I have to add, Aaron, and I would be truly amiss if I did not mention, my parents, Wallace and Carmen Ford, who instilled in me at a very early age, as soon as I could understand that being as good as is just not the goal here, and the goal is to be better and to consider yourself better. Well, a black person in a predominantly white situation, every school I went to was predominantly white, would typically get you in trouble. And so, because like, go and start from who do you think you are to, oh, heck, he actually is better than we are, hey, deal with it, and so, and yeah, I've told people, if nobody's ever called you arrogant, then you're not doing your job. You have to, because if you go around I'm trying to be as good as somebody, what is that? They said, no, you have to believe that you're better. And I tell that to my students, tell it to my son. You have to believe that you're better. And of course, that goes against everything in the American, story, if you will. Typically black men and black women who go around with that attitude wind up in very difficult circumstances. We see it a little differently, a little better today, but not always. That's for sure. I mean, we have, 3 black senators in the U.S. Senate today, I think.
Right.
And this is 2023. So we've got a long ways to go with respect to that. But I have to give my props to my parents, because they just told me it just doesn't matter. What matters is what you think of yourself and in that regard. And so, but as I said, when I was back to what we were talking about before, when I started working with the courts, I also was doing work with Percy Sutton, and Percy Sutton, of course, was the head of inner city broadcasting, having been a very prominent politician, also Malcolm X's lawyer, by the way.
Right.
And,
Correct.
which he was throughout his widow Betty Shabazz's life as well. And he established this investment, an investment company with the part of the financing coming from the federal government, to be a venture capital company to invest in minority-owned businesses around the country. And he asked me to start it up and basically be the executive vice president. And all of a sudden, I'm a venture capitalist. And so I'm going around the country and looking at these incredible projects that these men and women are coming up with. My favorite is this brother had looking to get funding to build and market a single-engine 2-seater airplane, which was going to be the Volkswagen of the sky for you. He said, well, not in New York, but in Arizona and Nebraska and Wyoming, and places where there's a lot of distance from here to there. Makes a lot of sense. And so they told me that you never should invest in anything without trying it out. So it's a single-engine 2-seater airplane. I actually got fool that I was. When you're 29, you do something. You look back and say, "What on earth were you thinking?" Right? But got in this single-engine 2-seater airplane. We flew over LA at 5,000 feet in an airplane that the engine. Well, let's put it this way: a Volkswagen engine would have been a significant improvement over what what we were flying around in. Yeah, but it was interesting because one of the things I learned a lot about is because I had not had a lot of exposure to business women and businessmen, particularly entrepreneurs, is what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur and why it's so necessary that there's institutional support for these kinds of situations, which led me to being appointed by then New York State Governor Hugh Carey to help establish New York State's first minority women business program. And the pushback was incredible, of course, because it's like, why? We've been doing it this way for so long, is what the various agencies are saying. Why should we have to do anything differently? And it's like, well, because the governor said so. Okay, so that kind of helped. But you know how people can drag their feet, and institutions are specialized in foot dragging. I don't care whether it's local, state, or federal. Change is not part of the DNA of government, by and large. It has to be imposed, has to be forced upon, has to be an emergency of some sort, and then you see. So the big thing again is to keep showing up. and I keep showing up and keep making sure that these demands were in place. And when Governor Kerry left and Governor Mario Cuomo was elected, the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus lobbied for me to head up the state of New York Mortgage Agency, which at the time was $1 billion state public corporation, and provided financing for single family housing and also other kinds of community development. And literally we're talking about tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars going out. And as importantly, to get the money for that, we had to deal with Wall Street. So all of a sudden, here I was dealing with the top investment banking firms at the time, their presidents and CEOs, names that don't resound so well anymore. Goldman Sachs is still around. Merrill Lynch is, a vestige of another organization, or whatever. But there's about 4 or 5 big ones out there, and they bring their team to present to me and our senior staff about why they should do the financing. And once again, you know what I'm going to say. I'd talk to the team and I'd say, "Where's the black people?" And I'd say it just like that. And they said, "What? And don't you know?" The next time they came back, they had black people. And not only that, but a number of these black people went on to form their own firms, to be another force within the entire finance industry and finance business. And I can't take total responsibility for that, but I know I did my part.
But it cuts to the point about equity inclusion. You cannot. I mean, now today they talk about diversity, but you cannot get to diversity unless you talk about equity inclusion and create the systems and the processes by which set that stage and that platform. And you were part of that pioneering effort. And again, going to state government and then setting that, leveraging that power, that office. People say, why is it important for blacks to be in this office? Not that they're there, but qualified people of color in those offices that speak right directly to the power and that can absolutely shift the culture of institutions on a dime. Things don't have to be that way, but if you don't have access, you just don't have that power, to bring about, that transformation.
Absolutely. Let's jump up. Wrong hand, wait. This way, no, that way. There we go. This gentleman once said, "Power concedes nothing without demand." It just doesn't. People are very happy to do things the way they are until somebody starts to, shake the table a little bit. And fortunately, as an appointee of the governor, I could shake it for a while. But of course, there's pushback. After a couple of years, I decided, that I was going to go over to the dark side, as it was, and actually work as an investment banker. But I wasn't in the investment banking part where, you're trying to. I sort of didn't make huge amounts of money or anything like that. But what I was doing was going around to various local and state governments and trying to explain to them how they could use public financing to do things like for housing or for infrastructure and all of these things, and not get beat, if you will, in the transaction, get their money's worth out of these things. And so I did that for a couple of years, literally flying all over the country with different, local and state governments. And then, having tried my hand at some entrepreneurship, where I found out just how hard being an entrepreneur is. David Dinkins, who I'd written speeches for when he was first running for mayor and for years, asked me to come into his administration to head up at that point New York City's Department of Ports and Trade, which is, what is that even? Well, the ports in New York City has about 150, 200 miles of waterfront property, which it rents out. It's really valuable. So, there's leasing involved, Fulton Fish Market, Bronx Terminal Market, Hunts Point, all were in my jurisdiction. And in the process, we learned a lot about how the city works internally. And then there was a reshuffling of government about a year after I was there, and I was now put in charge of the newly formed New York City Department of Business Services. And we had a mandate to establish New York City's first MWBE program. It's starting to sound familiar now. Right? Here we go again. And so, but again, I had the full backing of the mayor. And so, and I was a commissioner myself, not a deputy commissioner. And so it was kind of on equal footing.
you had a powerful window into something that happened. This was the cop riot in New York City when
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Giuliani led that cop riot.
Yeah, but yeah, that was it is one of the more interesting stories I think about how Rudy Giuliani was able to ride this incredibly racist campaign against David Dinkins, and still not only win, but then be called America's mayor. And all
Okay,
those.
well, I want to hold it right there because now we're getting warm. So I'm going to get this commercial in and we're going to pick it right up there.
Okay.
Sunday morning news, views, and interviews. Our guest is a man who was at the moment when things were happening. We left at the last break. We were talking about the ascension of I believe what they call the sovereign Southern District, Federal District of New York. Was that second? Is that the Second Circuit within the Department of Justice? What
Yes, this
was
is the
that
Second
also?
Circuit. Yeah, but as you say, he was U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. Yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
so this gentleman went from going after the mob to going after the city's first African American mayor, and he
Let's make sure that not only with the mob, but also going after Wall Street. He called himself the sheriff of Wall Street,
okay,
and he would okay, there's certainly enough shady dealings for that, but these are obviously white collar crimes, and he would
right.
come in, guys working in his office as executive, and all of a sudden here comes the U.S. attorney with a couple of marshals, and they handcuff you and walk you out in front of all your colleagues. I
He
mean, it's
perp
like
walked them. He perp walked Wall Street's
absolutely, yeah,
businessman. I mean,
yeah,
he was big into the showmanship of perp walking.
absolutely, absolutely, and it was really, but back to that police riot. By the time, and that happened, I think in August or September, I can't remember, but exactly when. But the election was coming up in November, and so this was probably like August, September, and it's interesting that crime had been on the rise all throughout New York City, and
Mm-hmm.
particularly the latter part of Ed Koch's tenure. And during David Dinkins' tenure, he instituted certain measures, including community policing, so that crime was actually going down. Okay, but of course, the New York City press, and particularly the press corps that covers City Hall, is still, even to this day, pretty much predominantly white. And many of the people who work there aren't even from New York City, so they come with this really kind of interesting view, we'll say, of New York. And so
Mm-hmm.
David Dinkins could the running joke, and it's not really that much of a joke, is that David Dinkins can do something really great, and say, "Yeah, that's okay," but then let's just something go halfway wrong. And it's like, and so the story that we used to tell commissioners and people in the administration is that David Dinkins took the Pope out on a ride in a boat in the East River, and the Pope fell into the river, and David Dinkins gets out and walks across the water, picks up the Pope and puts him back in the boat, and takes him to safety. The next day, the newspapers say David Dinkins can't swim. And so and so that kind of says pretty much what it was. But it was such an ugly ride. Those my offices were just a couple of blocks away, and it was like there's no way I'm walking around there. That day.
Mm-hmm.
And they were hanging the mayor in effigy, which has a lot of meaning
Oh
for
yeah,
black people. When anybody's
mostly
getting
white
hung,
cops. If you see the pictures and the shots of that, mostly white cops.
I think it was if there was a black cop there, I'm shocked because he or she would have probably wound up getting beaten themselves just for being black.
Mm-hmm.
It was a white mob, and as I said, they're hanging the mayor in effigy, and we know the history of black people in this country. Hanging is part of our very sad tradition,
Mm-hmm.
and institutionally speaking, and so, but this is the part that always got me is that it did not hurt his campaign. This is liberal New York City, where everybody's cool, cosmopolitan and all of those kinds of things. But I've always contended, and I do to this very day, that New York City is actually one of the most segregated cities in America.
Right.
Not by the demographics, obviously, but by how people interact and where they interact. I worked as a partner in a Park Avenue law firm after I got out of government, and this is, I think, 53rd and Park Avenue. And I could walk up and down the street and I might see somebody who wasn't a messenger or a secretary. Not many. And certainly when I went in that building, and that was where the Citibank headquarters were before they moved across the street to 53rd and Lex. And now it's, I thought there was such a diverse population, and it's no, it's just not that way. You still, to this day, Aaron, go to a restaurant in Soho, or go to a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, any time of the day, any day of the week, and you might want to go in there and start singing "We Shall Overcome," because there's just not a lot of people from the home team who don't have an apron on or a tray in their hands, and that is just the real truth of New York City. It's very serious. We know it's the most U.S. Department of Agriculture, Education has said that has said that New York City has the most segregated public school system. Not Jackson, Mississippi, not Birmingham, Alabama, New York City, cool, hip New York City. So, one of these days we'll finally, you can't cure a situation until you address that it's there.
Well, one of the things that David Dinkins' administration pointed out was the housing. A lot of folks that just were the public housing in the city. And I think that one of the things that raised the ire of a lot of whites was that when you realize, Washington Heights and other places, that those buildings, those high towers that were getting all these resources were actually public housing. And yet there was already that redlining of where Black senior citizens would be, and Hispanic senior citizens would be shipped versus if you were white or Caucasian. And then the level of service. And then one of the things that his housing commissioner was saying, listen, opened up the full portfolio regardless. So the waiting list was not segregated any longer under Dinkins. It was first come, first serve. And all of a sudden you started getting Hispanic abuelas and Black Jamaican grandmas up in the Washington Heights, up in some of these public housing units. And these folks kind of lost their mind. They you would have swore that you went into some wealthy white suburb and forced integrated them. This was public housing.
No, absolutely. But the little known, I'm sure whether it's little known or not, what's rarely spoken about is the reason David Dinkins lost, and he only lost by I think 1,000 votes out of a couple million cast. That's pretty close. Yeah. And I'll tell you a little story about election night in a moment. But Mario Cuomo was a Democrat. He was the governor. Right? So he was a big supporter of his fellow Democrat mayor in New York City, who was Black. Right? Decided that this would be a good time to have. This is very rarely people talk about, for there to be a referendum on the ballot for Staten Island to secede from New York City. Now, it was never going to happen. It was unconstitutional, illegal. It was just never going to happen. But he put it on the ballot, and guess what? All the predominantly white voters in Staten Island came out to vote because they wanted to vote for the referendum. And oh, by the way, while we're here, we might as well do this, right? And so and so meanwhile, in the Black community, and I was asked to represent the mayor all over the city of New York, and as election time was coming around, I said, look, this guy Giuliani, he's really not kidding around. He's going to get rid of the MWBE program. He's going to do this. How's he going to win? He's probably not going to win anyway. And all these kinds of things. And I'm saying, he's really not kidding around, and you need to go vote. And because people didn't see immediate results everywhere.
Exactly.
As if like 200 plus years of racism is going to be overturned in a 2.5-3 year term. And said, well, he's not doing enough for Black people. And they didn't come out to vote by just enough. Okay, just enough. And one of the things that I would say then, and I say now, when you're looking at mayors who are looking to make a difference, is the second term, or governors for that matter, is the second term. Okay, the first term you lay out your agenda. The first term you start to try to make some changes. But I've worked in government. I've worked, under two Senate, state governor administrations, and of course the city administration. And the civil service people are there. Okay, and basically their view is we can wait them out. Okay, we can just wait them out. We'll slow walk whatever it is that you're trying to do. We'll give it lip service and make it seem like we're trying. But if we don't really like it or support it, like something like minority women's business, going to from state agencies, those guys will just slow walk it, and then they don't make it to the second term. We can go back to business as usual.
So what happened election night?
Well, election night is kind of sad, but it is. Oh, yeah, you kind of laugh to keep from crying. I was, by the time the mayor's towards the end of his first term, I'd been on TV a lot, representing the mayor and very vocal and what have you. And so I was at the election night, whether it was at the Sheraton or the Hilton. And so, of course, there were TV booths set up, various stations. And they said, and the election that night, it was like, Dinkins is up. Oh, Giuliani's up 10,000. It was really just a horse race. And so at the point where Dinkins, it was like about 11 to 12 o'clock, and it was anybody's call. One of the stations asked me, hey, Press Ford, why don't you, Commissioner Ford, why don't you come and have a seat? And we'll talk about it. So I'm talking about how bad it would be if Giuliani got elected. And it's just terrible things. And he said, hold on one second. We just got word that David Dinkins conceded. And it's like, holy cow. And so I felt like, how they find those Japanese soldiers who've been fighting the war and 25 years after World War II is over. That was me. Fortunately, I had already packed my parachute. And, my plan was to, Dinkins was going to get reelected in May the following year. I was going to take this partnership with a Park Avenue firm. And so I had to leave a little, so I just had to accelerate that and went on to do that. But it was just too sad because what I'll tell you this, though, Aaron, the way I know that MWBE program was doing well is that when Giuliani took his oath of office, and those of your viewers who may remember his son just acting a total fool on the steps of City Hall. He's like 4 or 5 years old, acting like a 1-year-old. And when Giuliani finished his speech, he turned around, walked back into City Hall, and they set up a desk right there by the door, sat down, and abolished the MWBE program on the spot, his first act in office. And so I said, now, if Giuliani doesn't like it, you're doing a good job.
Right.
And it's taken all these years to get it back. It's still not where it needs to be.
Okay, we'll hold that thought. We got the last segment right after this commercial.
Okay.
Sunday morning news, views, and interviews. Our final segment here with Brother Wallace Ford. You talked about, again, centering on when you have the power and rising in power and at all the institutions from private sector to public sector, even as a student, when you're, again, this is, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you're noticing that at key points of our society, government, whether in private sector or government, where our communities are not there, the need to speak up and affirmatively ask, where is the diversity? And before you even conduct business with people and how that changes culture. We're right now in what we call the green economy. And we're probably going to witness the most significant shift with this clean energy, clean tech economy in response to climate change. President Biden is investing billions with a B, the largest amount of investments in the public and private sector to transform our energy sector nationwide. But again, the largest investment. And as you know, these things come and go. And the question is that they can absolutely leave behind whole populations. And so the question is the workforce development and opportunities to make sure all communities can have an opportunity to step into this place. And one of the things that you're a part of in the work that you've done with Medgar Evers College in conjunction with the State University of New York of Environmental Science and Forestry in the Adirondacks is the Timbuktu Job Summer Career Pipeline. Tell us a little bit about what does it mean to prepare and trying to make sure that we're blazing that path for the next generation, not only of all New Yorkers, but specifically African Americans and Hispanics and Southeast Asians, that we don't get left behind this time.
Well, it's been a very interesting project because I'm at Medgar Evers College. We don't get a lot of, and it's a predominantly Black institution, certainly. Mm-hmm. We don't get a lot of pushback as to why are we doing these kinds of things. In terms of trying to increase participation of non-white students in this entire initiative.
Mhm.
we're dealing with, I believe, a tipping point in more ways than one, in the sense that if nothing is done, you're much more of an expert on this than I'll ever be, but I know that if nothing is done, we're looking at a real major quality of life for the planet. On the other hand, you have some forces arrayed against this incredibly, which is like, no, we don't need to do all of these things because it's worked for us all these years, and it's just a hype. And you say, well, okay, well, you tell that to the folks. So yeah, there's just too many environmental disasters to even talk about. And so while we are, for the first time here at this college and with the City University of New York, and working with our colleague, State University of New York, looking to get students to, number one, just understand what the issues are. Okay, what is, when people talk about the environment, what are we talking about? Well, it's the air we breathe, it's the water we drink, it's the food that we eat, it's just everything about how life exists on this planet
Mhm.
that we have to be, of which we need to be aware. On the other hand, and a lot of that comes from, we co-partner. I'm in the Department of Public Administration, and we co-partner with our Department of Chemistry and Environmental Science. And the CES, Environmental Science, they deal with part one, which is just what are the issues from just a pure science standpoint, and what needs to be done also from a pure science standpoint. Being with public administration, what we're saying is that, okay, first you have to be able to articulate the problem, if you will, or the issues in such a way that it develops some kind of a policy. Okay, and then the policy turns into practice, and the practice turns into both implementation and then finally oversight. And these are things that don't happen in 6 months. They don't happen in a year. This planet didn't get polluted up to its eyeballs in a year. But it's the last 150 years, and again, you know more about this than I do, have really been a game changer, no pun intended, in terms of what this planet looks like. Just the last 150 years. That's not that long ago. And so you say, well, this planet cannot stand another 150 years of that. But everything that goes on with that first part, in terms of the various types of initiatives that need to be put in place to rectify, parts of wreckage, if you will, of the environment, require governmental support. And government is very vulnerable to interests that may be at total odds with everything that we've been talking about so far. So the only thing that one of the things that we can do, is not the only thing, one of the things that we can do is make sure that our elected officials of the very near future, would be our students, have a real feel for that, have a real understanding that government has a role, and if government doesn't play a role, here's what the consequences are going to be. And so that includes, as I said, everything from, as I was trying to say earlier, everything from going to water treatment plants and hydroelectric generating facilities, or seeing what you have students from Brooklyn or the Bronx, someplace, and say, well, yeah, this is what actually nature in another environment, like I say, up in the Adirondacks, looks like. Okay, but it's not going to look like this
Right.
much longer, unless when you get back, you do your studies, you get involved in public policy and public policy development. Understand that this is not a tree hugging issue. This is a life issue. And if you and your children you hope to have are going to live in a decent world, and you don't always have to have a face mask, for God's sake,
Right.
then you're going to have to look at things differently. So the combination, all that is to say, Aaron, the combination that we think is important is the notion of public policy, as well as the understanding of what environmental issues are and what
Mhm.
the policies are needed in order to address those. What do they look like? And so that's what we're doing.
One of the things they talk about in economics is the production possibility frontier. So as you expand that capacity, economies can grow. And intellectually is the capacity of, again, things that you expose people to, enrich in their environment that they are right now developing in. They can start to see those careers and see those opportunities. So you mentioned water treatment plant. A lot of people don't realize that, that's anywhere from, a 90 to $100,000 a year job.
Right.
And if you do not create the programs, the internships, the mentorships, or the exposure whereby they can actually see these as careers above and beyond just go to college, I'm going to get a history degree, an engineer, whatever, but to start to be as part of their professional development. This Timbuktu Jobs Pipeline does something, in my opinion, that's important, is that it exposes a generation to a new career path that many of them perhaps never even would have thought about. And that,
Well, many of those career partners have been many of those careers didn't exist.
right.
That's the other part. They just literally did not exist before. So yeah, it's a whole brave new world out there. With apologies to Aldous Huxley, yes.
But the thing is that historically, most careers that have been left of communities of color were what I call the labor wage. You're going to roll the wheelbarrow, you're going to push the broom, you're going to be the sweep, and heretofore we did not have academic institutions reaching out into high schools, and saying, we want to give you a look at something before you're going to be a junior, you're going to be a senior, but here are things that you need to roll around. You have opportunities and possibilities, but a pathway, because one of the things that not only looking at the future jobs, the pathway, the gateway is enrolling at a university. And speak to the power of young people of color seeing and entering through the door of the university to have that mentorship and that exposure and improving their life options in the future.
Yeah, no, I think it's extremely important because, first and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the career opportunities just literally didn't exist 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whether it's, wind treatment, just ecological, advances and so on. So I think it's, and what we try to do here in college is to just first of all open their eyes to the horizon of possibilities. Now this is something else, and the difference why this is really something else is that literally your lives and the lives of everybody that you know or care about are actually in the balance here. We really can't continue to see the world operate this way. And just what was it just 10 days ago when we had that air quality issue here in New York City, and then they said, well, this is what New Delhi looks like every day. And I said, Jesus Christ, if this is what New Delhi looks like every day, how is anybody even still alive there? And then you realize listen, I've been to Lagos, Nigeria, and I'm trying to think of some of the cities I've been to, where and that was, that's just a taste of what's to come, and I think that students are kind of waking up to it, but they need to know what to do about it, and so to that point, I think making it anything is easier, more accessible in terms of being able to learn about it to the extent it's interesting. Okay, and so we're trying to make it into this whole issue, everything we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes or so, to make it interesting.
Right.
And then you get interested in it, and then you say, well, I'm of the belief, get interested in it first, and then you might be saying, well, maybe could I make a living at this, as opposed to reverse. You said, yeah, you can make a living at this, but I'm not really interested in doing that. I guess I could have.
And you get them into the Adirondacks.
Well, yeah, you get to do that. Yes, absolutely. Or be able to breathe the air walking down the street in New York City. Last week was just amazing. It's like and so but I think trying to make it interesting for young people in the first place, and letting them understand that the survival of the progress of life as they know it or would like to see it really depends on you. And when I was coming up and you were coming up, there wasn't that kind of existential mandate. It was like, yeah, you want to do well for yourself and your family and your community and all those kinds of things, but not the planet. No, I don't think we were talking about that, in 1965, saving the planet, and in a real existential way, not saving from war and saving from imperialism. No, actually saving life on the planet. Yeah. So,
well, the thing is that it's a beautiful arc. It was a trajectory that you began as a youth, ending up in Japan, a arc that is taking you to where you are, and now you're providing that arc and that trajectory to a new generation. Again, you're not taking them to Japan, but you're taking them to the wilderness, the outdoors. You're connecting them with the climate sciences, and you're doing that, and you're still being that bridge for another generation. Brother Wallace, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, and we have to do this again. To the Grand Dam of Rotterdam, we're coming over for a wonderful cup of coffee.
Okay, excellent.